So we are going to be working more with Entity Framework. And so first, we're going to start out with taking a little deeper dive into Entity Framework code first. And then I am going to actually walk you through how to use database first. And what we know about Entity Framework so far is that it is an object relational mapping software, or an ORM. And so basically it takes our data representations in our classes and it converts those over into tables in a database. And when it makes that conversion, it uses defaults called conventions. And they are basically assumptions that Entity Framework makes about whether things are null or not null, or what the primary key is, what a foreign key is, etc. So here's what we know. In our classes, any property that we name ID, or if we use the name of the class followed by ID, is assumed to be the primary key. And if we make the data type int, it is also assumed to be an identity column. String properties are converted automatically into nvarchar with the max number of characters, and they allow null values. Int and double properties don't allow null values. String properties are going to be required unless they are entered as nullable. So when we enter them, if we do the string with the question mark, that makes them nullable. Int and double properties are required unless they are entered as nullable. Annotations can be used to modify conventions. And Fluent API can also be used to modify conventions. So that's what we know about the models. And obviously we have to create those first. And then we install Entity Framework Core, Entity Framework Core tools using the NuGet package manager. And we make sure that it is the same version number as our project. Okay, that is pretty key. And then we create a context class that is derived from DB context. Entity classes are DB set properties, and those actually become tables. The DB context has two virtual methods we can override to configure our context class and DB set properties. One of them is on model creating. We've used that quite a bit. It basically lets us configure our classes that will affect our database tables. And this is actually where we have specified our seed data. Fluent API is used to configure our entity classes. And when we do migrations, there is some Fluent API that's automatically generated in the up and down methods. The methods that are used for configuration, I've kind of included those. Entity, which is basically the class you're configuring. And then we have a Lambda expression, which is usually the property we are configuring. Has key or has data. If we're going to specify a primary key or a composite key, we would use has key. Has data obviously is what we have been using for our seed data. Okay. Is required, has max length. There are others, but these are basically ones that you would see used. And I do have an example. Okay, so here we are using on model creating, and we have created a model builder object, and then we used that object with the methods to kind of customize properties. So the class in this example is book. And so we are modifying the title property. And we're making it required, and we're saying it has a maximum length of 200. This little example shows you how to do a composite key. And the only way to create a composite key is to use Fluent API. Okay, so in this little example, the class or the table is course assignment. And you can see here that we've got has key, and then we've got 2 columns specified. And that is the syntax for a composite key. And then this one is configuring a little bit more with the book entity. So we've got the book class here, has key. So we're specifying the key. We are configuring the title property. And then we're adding a little bit of data. And you can see that not much to that particular entity or class. We've got ISBN and title. The other method is on configuring, and that configures the context itself, and that's normally done in app settings. So that is where you would see that method used. Okay, so we create the context class. You know, at the top of the context class is typically where we would have the DB set information, which tells it, you know, what the names of the tables are and which classes to map over to tables. And then below that is where we would be using on model creating to create our initializer, which is our seed values. And I can pause a minute and show you, just as a reminder, what some of that looks like. All right, so I've pulled up one of my repos, my private repos on GitHub, just to show you. You all should have a copy of this. This is the music store from chapter 8, but you can see this is our context file. And so we create music context from DB context. The DB set is where we are specifying the classes and the corresponding tables that it's going to create. And then below that, we are using on model creating to basically enter all that seed data. So this is something that should look pretty familiar to all of you. So after we add the seed values, we open up app settings.json and we add the connection string. And so if you have a project where you are going to use the authentication system, there is going to be a connection string in there. And you will need to use that connection string. Okay, you can change the name of the database, okay, but you're going to want to use that same connection string that the authorization system is using. Okay, and just to show you that, we will take a look at app settings. So if there is one in here already, it's probably going to say default context here. Okay. So here, obviously it did not exist first because I added this, and this is the name of the database that is going to be generated. After you set up app settings, then you're going to go into Program CS and you have to enable dependency injection for your DB context. So that usually is a very long line of code. And it'll go above builder.services.add controllers with views. You're going to put it above that. And here you can see this is the code that is adding those options for DB context, adding all the services. And I should tell you that this code has changed over the different versions. So if you are using, .NET Core 6 and 7, this is the code that you would use. If you're using an earlier version, that code is going to look a little different. Right? And it may end up being placed in a different file altogether. Okay? As they change versions, some of these things shift around. But the main purpose of what it does not change. Okay? This is for dependency injection. So it basically is going to provide any objects that it's dependent on. Once you've done all of that, your next step is actually to create the database. And that's a two-step process. You first have to add the migration, which is going to create a migrations folder. And the folder can have up to 3 files that are created. There is whatever the name of the migration is. So if you call it initial create, it'll have a date and time stamp, whatever you've named the migration.cs. You will have the timestamp, the name of the migration, whatever you've called it, .designer. And you may also have the model snapshot. This last file will appear if you've done multiple migrations. If you are doing the first migration and there aren't any others, you will get the first 2. This last one basically says what has changed. Okay, so if we take a look at the example out here, there is a migration folder. And so here we've got the initial create. And this is also where you are likely to see some of the Fluent API code. Okay, so here we've got has column type, has index, has data. So this is basically telling it how it's going to generate those tables. And then it's got some of the seed data in here. And let me widen this up. Okay, so this was the initial create designer. And if we look back over here, the designer has the code from the annotations, the seed data, metadata, etc. Okay. Initial create. This is where you're going to find the up method that does the creating. And you can see here's the create table command. And it also has the down method, which removes the tables. So you're going to see the drop table command. And then if there have been multiple migrations, this will tell what the difference is. And my guess is that I've deleted the migration folder and regenerated things, which is why that showed up. So the command that we use to get that migration folder And those files, again, is add migration. Then the other command that is required is update database. Okay, so those are the two commands that you need to use. Scaffold DB context we'll actually be using later today. This is what we do for database first. Okay, so you'll be taking a look at that a little bit later. Once the database has been created, you should always view your tables and the database to verify they were created correctly. And you can use the SQL Server Object Explorer for that. And then once you verify that everything was created correctly, you can go ahead and create the controllers and views for each of the classes using scaffolding. And then anything you want in the navigation menu has to be added to layout. Okay, the layout view, which is in your shared folder. Okay, so that in a nutshell is what we have been doing.